It is such an honor to be here, and I love that sort of beginning anticipation of the school year. It's been so many years since I've been out of school as a student, but I still get that sort of charge. And for those of you that live in Madison year-round, the summer is this sort of peaceful calm, and then August 15th, you know, all the students kind of descend back, and it gives me such a charge to have that. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and I realize you've already had a long day of content, and so I'd like to keep this as interactive as possible, keeping in mind that we are videoing, so I'll almost certainly repeat any comments that you make just so that they're captured on the recording. So I want to talk a little bit today about field placement, site expectations, and comparing that experience with jobs that you may have had in the past. For my own info, how many of you have had social work internships before? Okay, so at least half of you, and I'm assuming many of you are MSW students who got your BSWs already. So by all means, comment and let me know if what I'm describing as appropriate site expectations are totally off the wall or if I'm skipping something really essential. So let's keep this meaningful for you. And then I want to talk a little bit about characteristics that at least I believe support success and areas that require flexible, thoughtful practice. I am passionate about the field of social work and the academic discipline of social work, and I think one of the things that is so special about it is how dynamic it is, how much the discipline is centered on meeting needs of patients, I work in healthcare, sorry, clients, populations, settings that are relevant in the real world, and that link between evidence-informed practice and practical strategies and social justice themes. So to me, combining all of that into field placement is a pretty cool thing to do. Okay, so we know that professionalism is expected by a variety of different official bodies, the NASW, the profession of social work. Oh, for those of you who are incoming BSW students, NASW is the National Association of Social Work. Community, agencies, agency supervisors, field faculty. What do you think are some typical expectations associated with being a professional? What does that mean when you hear that word? Too boring a question? Okay. Let's look at the way that job and field placement are similar. And these are obvious, and we can roll our eyes, right? But you show up on time, you're mentally present for the work, you're respectful of those with whom you work. You communicate schedule changes, you're prepared, and you respond to email in a professional way. I think that is true whether you're working at Michael's over the summer or you're doing your school field placement. You dress appropriately for the job. I do want to comment on that because I think that's one of the things that's uniquely rough about field placement, because you may not have a whole wardrobe of professional wear. You can't afford professional wear to go out and buy an entire wardrobe of professional wear because you're students and you're working for free. And I think that that is a source of consternation for a lot of people. And ultimately, I think that dressing appropriately is more important than dressing fashionably. And dressing appropriately is more important than dressing with variety. So if you have to wear the same stupid used pair of khakis that you got at Goodwill 3 times a week, that's okay. It really is. The key is, I think, to wear clothes that don't set you off with your clients. The work that we do is profound and meaningful and requires vulnerability on all sides. And you really don't want what you're wearing to get in the way of that. Use professional communication. Timely, clear, respectful, and informed. That's all the obvious stuff, right? So what's different in field placement from employment? Yeah?
I feel like you can ask a lot more questions and be open to things and challenge things from your supervisor. If you don't see something that's right, you kind of have a place where you can ask more questions.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's a place where it's okay to ask questions. I think it's actually the right thing to do is to ask questions for a variety of different reasons we can get into in a second. Yeah?
And kind of building off that, you're expected to make some beginner mistakes. You're not expected to hold all the responsibility for that position.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a place where you're expected to make mistakes. You don't have to pretend at competence. You don't have to pretend to understand everything. What else? Yeah?
With my internship, it sounds like I'll kind of try out some different hats before they put me where they want me kind of thing, or where I see best fit for me.
Yeah, trying on a bunch of different hats, at least at the beginning of the internship, and maybe all the way through. You know, I had a field placement internship where about halfway through the year, I sort of thought to myself, okay, well, this was a lesson in what I don't want to do, you know, but how good to do that in the context of something with an ending. And then I could focus the remaining 4 or 5 months on what can I learn here that I might not be able to learn as easily in the setting of my choice. So I think that actually is a really great lesson you can get out of field placement. Yeah?
You have a lot more support in terms of people who are ready to help you figure out how to do things.
Yeah, it's a really supported setting. Now, that has pros and cons, right? So the pros of having lots of support is you have the opportunity to bounce situations off your fieldwork supervisor, your field faculty member, your field seminar participants, your other students. That's really awesome. What's the downside of that? A lot of cooks, yeah, right. So one of the things that is important about navigating field placement is coping with those variety of cooks. And do you have any tips for coping with a lot of cooks? Yeah.
Find the one that's, I don't know, the leader of them.
The leader of the cooks, yeah, right. Don't follow the sous chef, follow the guy with the big white hat. Yeah, right? I think that's part of it. What else? Yeah.
Kind of take like all the different experiences, but it's okay to just kind of follow the one that aligns with you most.
Yeah, so take in information and then follow what makes the most sense for you. I think that's true with a caveat, which is that field placement you're ultimately being graded on, right? So you gotta, at the early end, I think, develop open communication about expectations and methods by which those are gonna be assessed. And that's where your many cooks should be guiding you on that, your field faculty and your field placement supervisor. But I think if there's questions in your own head early on, getting clarification on the front end is way easier than on the back end. I mean, in true social work practice, and those of you who've worked in the field before may be sort of aware of this, there are occasionally settings where asking for permission is easier than, no, asking for forgiveness is easier than asking for permission. I think field placement is the wrong place to test that. So, okay. Here was my list. You guys didn't mention the pay. Nobody was feeling snotty, huh? Okay, that's one difference between job and field placement. It is temporary. There is something magical about it being temporary, I think. I mean, it really allows you freedom to explore. It's also a direct part of your career advancement or growth plan. So that means that your field placement may be a potential job offer down the line. It certainly can be a potential letter of recommendation. And so you want to keep that in mind, I think. And your role may be defined differently. You now represent a profession, and the code of ethics applies for you. And so one sort of practical comparison with that is if you've worked in the past as providing direct care to people, say camp counselor or church school teacher or something, you may have really been enthusiastic about knowing one of the kids in a different setting and having it be your family's friend or anything like that, and that way, and then you could be their camp counselor. That works well in those kinds of areas. In social work field placement, one of the parts of the code of ethics is to avoid dual relationships, meaning if you know somebody socially in one setting, you don't want to be providing them social work services in another setting. And so those are the kinds of things that you'll be learning early on in the semester as you get familiar with the code of ethics that are going to guide your work a little differently. And as a lot of you guys mentioned, there is something really special about being in this position of inquiry. And we talked a little bit about what that means in terms of the freedom to not know everything and the freedom to ask questions. it's also the chance where you can ask for additional orientation, or if there's an aspect of the field or the work or the clientele that you really want to have an opportunity to learn about, it's okay to ask about that. I also have observed students doing in some really lovely and graceful ways, and I think it's a special thing to be able to do, is you're coming at an agency or a setting with a new set of eyes. And you can be the person to ask why something is done a certain way, whereas everybody else who's been working in the field for a million years does it that way because that's how it's done, right? So the fresh set of eyes can say, well wait, why is it done that way? And that'll create some really great opportunities for clinicians in the work setting to either describe the rationale, or in what has certainly happened to me a couple times, been like, I don't know, it's actually kind of stupid, let's revise. So that's a great thing about being new to the setting. So there are ethical guidelines, of course. I think this learning about ethics and the profession is something you're going to do your whole career. And I find them endlessly fascinating, and to me they're fascinating often because there aren't easy answers. There are codes that we want to abide by, and some of those are really simple, right? So don't have sex with your clients, right? I mean, I think that's one where there's not a lot of room for confusion. There are others that are a little bit more confusing, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those now, and you're going to spend your entire education learning more about them, and you'll have the opportunity to think and write and talk about them for many, many years. But you want to avoid dual relationships. Does anybody have questions about that? We talked about that a little bit. If you live in a little town and you're working in an agency in a rural setting, that's more challenging. So certainly if that's your situation, you're going to want to talk a little bit more about that. Abide by scope of practice. Basically, that means that you want to be aware of what the boundaries are for your work as a social work intern. And maybe a really simple example, there's a lot of complicated examples, but if your client asks you for a ride home personally, that's beyond your scope of practice. Honor social work values, practice with integrity, and honor confidentiality. That one, again, may be different from side human service jobs you've had in the past. In the social work school, in your role in field placement and as a clinician later in life, you don't want to share information about your clients with anybody. The exception to that is professional supervision, and in some settings, your field seminar case discussions. But I think even in those, it's good practice to change enough identifying details so that you're not violating somebody's personhood. And then adhere to agency guidelines about confidentiality. There's a little bit of variation. I think one example that varies a little bit by agency is if you run into one of your clients in the grocery store, what do you do? So my practice has always been that I'm not the first one to say hi. I'll see somebody and I'll kind of do a little eye contact, and if they don't say hi, I don't know why that is. That may be because they're with somebody who doesn't know that they have a social worker. So I just leave it be. But you can check in with your agency about policies that way. Social media. Is social media use professional? Is it ethical? Yeah.
I say we use it in the right way, like if it's promoting something that the agency is doing that's beneficial, like for the community. But as far as like putting identifying information or even talking about cases in general, I don't think that's professional. That's
and let me try to rephrase that for the video. That was really nicely said. So one thought is that it kind of depends on how you're using it. If you're using it to promote values or projects of the agency without releasing identifying information about clientele, that's appropriate. Thoughts on that? So I think part of the problem, and this is a research area that is just waiting to be plumbed, and I've been saying this to every group of students that I see, because I think that it's students that are coming up that are much better situated to do this than somebody who's been in the field for a long time like me. Social media is an incredibly broad word that describes a gazillion different things. And it completely depends on what platform you're using in what context and why, right? So obviously, for your personal social media use, and this is just to protect you as a professional, you want to use it cautiously. You don't want to friend or follow or add a client to your network, right? Even though some of the people that you work with in your site agency may have done so. It still is sort of against the NASW code to do so. And the NASW Code of Ethics, for those of you who've been in social work school for a bit, just released a really nice, thorough update to the Code of Ethics that included a 30 or 40-page treatise on utilization of technology in social media. So it was long overdue, and it was a huge project that I think was nicely done. Consider a pseudonym for online accounts. Avoid posting photographs or content implying unprofessional behavior. I'm assuming this is something that you guys are navigating a whole lot better than people who are 10 years older than you, who probably completely got burned by the fact that nothing dies online. But be aware that when you're job searching these days, some recruiters and certainly some people at agencies are going to look and see what's out there for you, and you don't necessarily want unprofessional stuff up there. Confidentiality. Comments or discussion about clients is always off limits. Now that said, there are some platforms of social media that can be really helpful for you professionally. And I do want to acknowledge those. So I think for many people, LinkedIn is a nice way to connect with other professionals and find out what they're doing. For myself, there's a platform called ResearchGate, which is a way to sort of keep track of what like-minded professionals are publishing or what projects they're a part of. And over the years, I've connected with collaborators from all over the country, and it's kind of an easy way for me to keep track of what's happening and get excited about new initiatives coming down the pike. So I think in that way, social media can be really helpful. And then, exactly as you said, I think a lot of social work involves advocacy around social change. And certainly social media can be a really helpful platform for that within the agency and the school and the NASW guidelines. I personally find that is the hardest area to navigate, though, and I want to be open about that. And so one example that came up for me earlier this summer is I was part of an advocacy event at the Capitol around getting better access to care for people with a disease that I work with. And so I went representing UW and the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and I went with a number of people who have cystic fibrosis, and then who may or may not also have been my clients. And the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation afterwards tweeted all these photos of us with our names and said, awesome advocacy, this is great. And then I wasn't sure what to do with that. And the ethics code doesn't really offer a lot of guidance in terms of what to do with that. So I think that even when you're in the field for a while, you're going to have issues of sort of thinking about what that might look like and what that might mean. I certainly didn't want patients to start following my Twitter account. So then it's just sort of hard to figure out what to do. Open for any advice and research for sure. Okay, what are the characteristics of success? Ask questions, learn the culture of your organization. Obviously, if you're working with an organization aimed at kids, the culture may be a little bit different than if you're working with people who are chronically mentally ill and homeless. So there may be different cultures of care. Take initiative with learning opportunities, show respect, bring ideas. I think that's huge. Don't be the person that's just poking holes and finding things that are wrong. Come up with ideas, too. Use good self-care and strike balance. I think that's something that you can integrate into your work early in your career, and that makes it easier to stick to later. Follow through. Think through the implications for your work and actions. Integrate content from your classes. The reality is a lot of people in your field agency may not be caught up with emerging practice or emerging evidence base, and so you can be the link between academe and clinical work, which is really awesome. Understand that learning is a journey. It's a never-ending journey. Okay, Integrating evaluation into your work, this gets back to the idea of a lot of cooks. So one of the other really awesome things about being in a position of inquiry is it allows you a formal mechanism to check in regularly with yourself and do self-evaluation, which I think when you're caught up in the daily aspects of clinical work is easy to lose sight of. So I think internship is a really awesome time to be able to sort of check in with yourself about what went well, what could go better, what would you like to stretch in terms of skills, and have an open mind. In terms of evaluations received, let the positive feedback sink in and believe it, which I think is really hard for all of us to do. And then try to appreciate the critiques for the growth it can spark. I mean, I think we all want to get the A+ all the time. And the reality is that sometimes it's the feedback that isn't 100% positive that can be the area that allows you to grow. Do you want to go through some case scenarios? Audrey, do we have time?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so I have a few. We can scan this one. If you think it's boring, we can move on to another, okay? So here's one. You're off to a great start in your new placement. You've met your supervisor and you're excited about the learning plan you've created together. As time passes, you've started to feel like the relationship has sort of gotten off course. You've found that you and your supervisor differ in terms of how you work for change with clients, and you feel as though you're not fully understood, nor do you really have the opportunity to fully express your own thoughts in supervision. Now you're worried you're going to get a negative eval if things don't work out, and you're not sure what to do. Thoughts? Yeah.
Proactively seeking out feedback with your supervisor and making sure that communication channel is open, even while you're feeling like things are going off track, especially during those times.
Yeah, proactively seek feedback from your supervisor, even if you feel like things are going off track a little bit. Yeah. And by your supervisor, do you mean the person in the agency or your field faculty?
Both.
Yeah, right answer, good answer. Yeah, I mean, I think this is one place where having a couple cooks is really helpful, because you can always bounce things off the other person to get advice on what to do next. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, since we have this learning plan, I think it's always good to reference that whenever you're dealing with your supervisor. So it's sort of like a guide of like where you know, what you agreed upon at the beginning.
Opa, yeah. Right, reference the learning plan. The learning plan is a beast to build and write, but it is a handy document to have. Yeah, helps you stay on track. Anything else to plumb from this one, or should we move on? Okay, I'm guessing by the crickets. How about this one? You've just started your dream field placement. By the way, what is your dream field placement? Does anybody have a dream field placement? Or too shy? It's too big of a group to say? Okay. I mean, you could say like your dream field placement is, I don't know what. Social work outreach in Bora Bora. Okay. You've just started your dream field placement and completed a thorough orientation that covered rules and expectations for the agency. As the weeks are passing, you've noticed that some of the expectations you learned about are not often reflected in practice. Your practicum is 16 hours a week, but you're repeatedly asked to spend an extra 4 hours each week to attend to client issues. Or several permanent staff members wear jeans despite the dress code. Thoughts on that? Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think the first problem is a little bigger.
Except on laundry day, but yes.
Especially in terms of boundary and the framework that we're expected to create and to follow with our agencies. The second one, like, it's annoying for sure, but I think you have to ask yourself, is anyone really being hurt by it? Is anyone really being put in a position of exploitation by this? Or is it just irritating because I'd really like to wear my jeans too?
Right. Could everybody hear? So number 1 is a bigger issue in terms of boundaries than number 2, which is annoying and unfair, but what are you going to do? I think that's probably a good summary. I think to number 2, it doesn't matter if other people are wearing jeans. I mean, is that the sword you want to fall on, right? Like just, I think that's one of the other things that's really important early in social work care is to figure out the concept of picking your battles. And I would very, very rarely identify as jeans as the battle I want to fight. But, okay, let's talk about the first one, because that's a little bit more serious. Yeah?
I was going to say, just remember that even though we're students and we're working for free and all that, that we still have our rights to set boundaries and say, nope, I can't work for this week. I have several other classes and jobs to attend to. Like, we have that right, so.
Yeah. Okay. So to really just sort of assert the busy life of a student and say, I'm so sorry, I'm just not available those extra hours. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a good time to use your hour of supervision, like of direct interaction with your supervisor, to let them know that maybe they don't realize that you're going to be there, that they're giving you 4 extra hours of work. So just like bringing it up before you, are upset about it or are trying to make it an intentional issue.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So before you sort of go charging into battle, check in with the supervisor during supervision to get some thoughts on that. Yeah?
I suppose it would be beneficial to ask, are there 4 other hours that I have been utilizing for something that's not very beneficial to me or the agency, and perhaps to fill it in with those client issues that you want me to do? So kind of like saying, how can we manage our time better if this is something that you do really need help with?
So, and I think that's a good one for us to talk a little bit more about. So the idea was to raise the idea of an hours swap, right? I think that that's a really interesting idea, and I think you want to be careful about what you're offering and really decide for yourself whether you're comfortable doing so. So I think it probably isn't unusual in your field placement for your agency to have a special training or a special meeting day during some off hours for you. And you might decide that that would be of enough value to you for your learning and special enough for the agency that you want to work those hours. And I think that would be a situation where it would be great to be able to say, can I take Tuesday off instead this one time? Or if there's a really unusual client situation where your supervisor thinks this would be a really great learning opportunity for you, your client is going to court and you could accompany them, something like that that might not happen on another time, and you could decide whether your schedule would be adaptable. I think that is different from an agency that may be critically and chronically understaffed and is seeking extra help. And I think that that is a time when your field faculty member can help you develop some language to describe practicum as being an opportunity for you to learn a certain amount in a certain amount of hours, and that you're not able to or you're not allowed to go beyond that. And I rambled and there was another hand up and I'm so embarrassed. Who else had a comment?
But you covered it.
Oh, darn, I'm so sorry. It would have been so much better if you'd said it. Okay. Other thoughts on this one? Okay. So, to sum up, remember, you represent yourself and the school and the social work profession. Follow rules and agency expectations. If you're unsure, ask. And I do think it's worth noting that you're building professional relationships now. And as somebody that works for a big institution in town, we absolutely remember at UW Hospital interns that were really, awesome. So I think that's something that's sort of helpful to keep in mind. Thanks, you guys. Other thoughts? Okay, thanks.